What's up, y'all? It's Michael here with Sam and our special guest today, Brandon Carroll, the lead reporter for AllGators on FN. Pleasure to have you with us today. We wanted to really dive into the depths of Gator football. I know we've talked about it a lot on this pod already, but we kind of really wanted to get into the nitty gritty of the offseason that I think never sleeps really in college football, and kind of looking ahead to what we can expect from the Gators in the 2024 season. So, with that being said, thank you again, Brandon. Really appreciate you coming on the pod today. And I know Florida Gator basketball has been going crazy recently, but really wanted to focus a lot more on Gator football. I think it's just under 200 days away, which, my goodness, I cannot wait any longer than that. So, yeah, without further ado, we wanted to kind of kick things off by, I don't know if you wanted to introduce yourself before we get into it, but
Yeah, you kind of said it all. I'm Brandon Carroll. I currently work as the lead reporter at AllGators. It's a Sports Illustrated Fan Nation affiliate, covering football, basketball, recruiting for them over there. So, like you said, I am in the bulk of basketball season right now, but with training camp and everything coming up for football, it's definitely a good time to kind of preview what the next season looks like for the Gators.
yeah, and I think I'm just going to briefly drop a quick story. Like the way that I met Brandon, and the saying "Gator Nation is everywhere." I was out at downtown in Gainesville, coming back grabbing some McDonald's, and I heard someone talking Gator football, it might have just been college football in general, and I had to stop by. And little did I know it was Brandon talking about some really cool stuff. So really appreciate you being here again. And without further ado, let's break down kind of the Gators roster. So I know a lot of changes have been made from the team last year. I think the Gators are ranked third in the SEC in returning production, which is always a good thing for the most part. I mean, some might say, 5-7 season, why are we, returning so much production? But I think a lot of major changes were made. So do you mind talking about, maybe some of the big portal moves that have been made, and whether you think the roster now is better or worse than what we saw last fall?
Yeah, I think one thing that I will say, and I don't want to necessarily draw a direct comparison to this team just because of how the heights that they reached last year, but Florida State returned a lot of production from some of their lesser seasons over the past few years, and they were able to make that jump. I'm not saying Florida makes that jump, but returning production isn't necessarily always a bad thing even when you are 5-7. So there are steps to be taken with returning players who are key pieces in any success that you saw throughout the season. But Florida's kind of addition and subtraction through the transfer portal was, I mean, I think it was better than it was last year in terms of the pieces that they were able to get. I thought they got a lot of proven producers and some guys who are high upside that can definitely kind of make waves earlier than some of the guys we saw last season. I thought, even at the time, I thought Damian George was kind of a reach take that was someone that they, were hoping could live up to the potential that he showed once at Alabama. It wasn't necessarily a guy that was going to kind of slot in at that right tackle spot and have a lot of success. I think this season they took a guy in Brandon Crenshaw Dixon, who I believe is, I tweeted it out yesterday. I think he's probably the highest value portal piece that Florida's picked up under Billy Napier's tenure in Gainesville, and he has potential to produce at that level. He has experience at both right and left tackle. Has started close to 20 games at each, and getting someone who is proven in that area was crucial for Florida. The offensive line is always going to be a area where you look at it before the season and there's questions because of what it looked like last season. So to get a guy proven as him, I think that's huge. You got Grayson Howard on the other side of the football, who is someone that they wanted coming out of high school. He showed some flashes last year for South Carolina. Now he's coming into the fold to work alongside Shamar James and some of the young pieces at linebacker. So those are the two that I really point to as big portal pieces that they've picked up, and two guys I think can contribute significantly for the team heading into 2024.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I don't think the Gators made any huge, splash hires that,
Mm-mm.
social media is going to go crazy about. But I do think that in terms of what our specific needs were, we really hit on exactly what we needed. I think, especially when you look at some of the other positions on the defense, getting Traquez Bridges from Oregon, getting Joey Slackman from Penn, one of the most productive, defensive linemen in the country last year. I think those are the additions that people aren't necessarily talking about that I'm really, really excited about. Triquez can really play anywhere in that DB room. I'm really interested to see where he ends up. But yeah, I think that especially that the linebacker room and the offensive line both get significant improvements from those guys you were talking about. I'm very excited for the linebacker room specifically. I think we can go 4 or 5 deep and have some serious talent that deep into the roster. So especially with the new additions we just got in this last class in Aaron Childs and Miles Graham. So I think those guys are going to be studs. And I'm interested to see if they get as much early play time as some of the other freshmen did last year. So yeah, would you say this roster is a better looking roster top to bottom overall than last year's? I know we lose some guys like Princely, and obviously the Twitter was going crazy about Trevor Etienne leaving. But what do you think about the roster overall this year as opposed to last year?
Uh, it,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
Okay.
overall, do you think the
Sorry.
roster is like
Sorry.
better or
I thought
worse
you were
than
talking
last
to
year?
Sam for a second. I was like, oh,
Oh
like,
no, no,
Sam, you got to answer. My fault.
are you good?
I would say it's definitely an interesting dynamic just because you do lose some of those guys who were key to the product. Like, obviously, Trevor Etienne was the best player on the offense side of the football. Obviously, Eugene Wilson can kind of be in that fold as well, but from a touch standpoint, from a production standpoint, it was Trevor Etienne. He was the guy on the offense side of the football, and so it's hard to replace that. But I don't necessarily think it's like the. I think that if you look at the roster from top to bottom, it's definitely I think it's better just because of the freshmen that they brought in, but I also think it's still young. So I don't necessarily know how that's going to directly translate to wins this season. I
Yeah,
think that it's still at a spot where you can say that the talent is better, but there's a lot of inexperience and a lot of growing pains that I still think are going to be had during the 2024 season. And that's not necessarily a byproduct of the team not being good or being talented, but it's just a byproduct of having so many young pieces that are going to be playing critical roles, so many underclassmen who are going to be filling starting positions for Florida heading into next year.
yeah, and I didn't want to take directly from Josh Pate, but he said something that really resonated with me like less than a week ago. He said, we could legitimately be the 20th best team in the country and still finish 6-6 with the schedule that we have. So it's really
Right.
crazy to think that that's the case. And obviously, if we end the season 6-6, there's going to be a quasi civil war amongst Gator fans and the Twitter space in general. But yeah, in terms of the young guys on the roster, I really think Napier was playing more chess than checkers and giving a lot of those guys a good amount of play time last year. I mean, I think we were one of the youngest teams in the country and gave young guys some of the most reps in the country last year. So now they kind of get some of that experience under their belt. They have tape to look at in the offseason, and I'm really excited to see where they go next year. But with that being said, we kind of wanted to go specifically breaking down the offense a bit and the defense. What do you think are some of the strengths and weaknesses of the offense that we're going to field next year on Saturdays in the Swamp?
Yeah, I think obviously returning Graham Mertz, I think the quarterback spot's going to be a strength just because of what you saw him do last season, have his a resurrection year from what he did at Wisconsin to moving to Florida. You see how he kind of produced at a significantly higher rate while being in his first year in Gainesville. I think ultimately with him kind of coming back and having an extra year under his belt in Billy Napier's system, you're going to be able to get more out of him. You're going to be able to get more out of the offense because he's able to understand what's going on. He's able to understand the operation of everything because that's what he was brought in to do. He was brought in to be an operational quarterback. He wasn't brought in to light up stat sheets or have a team that scores 40 points per game. He was like if we look at last year and what he was supposed to do, he was a game manager. And that's exactly what he was supposed to do. He played to his role. I think he can elevate from that game manager spot to be just a little bit better, to be, an above average quarterback that puts Florida in positions to score points and to operate in the way that Billy Napier wants them to, where they churn out yardage and they hold onto the football, dominate the time of possession battle. and they're able to kind of keep away from opposing teams. And because ideally that's his style. And
Do
then
you, do you think
always,
that style? I'm sorry to cut you off. Do you think that style
no,
is
you're
going to be
good.
enough to compete though in a schedule like this? When you get to that gauntlet at the end, do you think slightly above game manager, given the talent, given the uncertainties on defense, is that going to be enough to get wins in that gauntlet?
I'm not necessarily sure about just the style in general. I've been critical of Billy Napier's style since he's arrived. I thought that the desire to run the football 30 plus times a game is archaic. Obviously, that's not exactly what's been the product because Florida's been playing from behind more than a lot of Gator fans would like, but there is still the desire to do that. That's still his pace, and because of the success he had at Louisiana Lafayette, and because of the mild success he's seen at times running that system, it's going to be what Florida does. Like it's not. I don't see any major changes coming. They had times last year where they would do that, and then they try to take the deep shot. They try to do the trick play, and it didn't always work, but you saw flashes of it. But I think that's really what you're going to get with Billy Napier. I don't think there's much that's going to change there. Not necessarily saying that's a good or a bad thing, because I think there are times where it works, times where it doesn't. But in terms of being able to push past that 6-6 mark, if you are getting in late into the schedule, which the entire schedule is a gauntlet, you get into mid-October, and that schedule gets 10 times harder.
Yeah.
If they haven't won 5 games by mid-October, they're not bowl eligible, because it gets to be a brutal schedule. So it's really difficult to see that offense kind of pushing them past in the late stretch of the season, that 6-6 mark, 7-5 mark at this stage. And then weakness, I would say, is really the offensive line. It's the offensive line until it's not, just because of the new pieces you're rebuilding once again up front. You have a lot of question marks up there. Is Austin Barber going to move back to right tackle? Is Devon Manuel going to step in for him and have Barber move as the swing tackle again? Who's going to start at the guard spots? Is Damian George going to move to a guard, or is Najee Harris going to take that spot? There's so many questions that kind of arise there. So it's still a lot to figure out for Florida up front heading into next season.
Yeah, I had a little bit different of kind of perspective on the strength. I still think that the running back room is the strength of this offense.
Right.
I think that someone could really convincingly make the argument that the running back room got better in the offseason, despite losing Trevor Etienne. I mean, when you talk about the guys that we added, like Cannon Daniels and Jaden Ball from this class, Jaden Ball, someone that Bama really, really wanted. Cannon Daniels, who dropped nearly 3,000 rushing yards his senior season in high school. I mean, these guys are studs that I'm sure will get some reps this season. I don't know if they'll be game changers, but we also can't ignore Cam Carroll will be back. This is a 1,000-yard running back with a lot of experience coming out of Tulane, who split carries with Tyjae Spears and still had that 1,000-yard season. He was out all of last season. I think if he's back and healthy, this running back room could be deeper top to bottom than last year. I mean, Trayon Webb is going to move up that ladder a little bit too. So we have 5 guys that I think legitimately could play football almost anywhere in the country. And then, yeah, like you said, the offensive line, I'm kind of tired of getting bullied around by, some lesser schools, some worse programs, honestly, on both sides of the ball. But yeah, I think we do have a lot of guys that we have to kind of play around with and move around. So I really hope that, the competition kind of makes all of them, the whole room better, I guess, on the offensive line. And then really quickly, is there any sleeper breakout player that you're kind of looking at going into the season? I don't know if Trey Wilson is a sleeper anymore, but yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I don't think Trey Wilson's a sleeper anymore. I did a story 2 days ago. Oh no, last Friday, and it went out Saturday, I think, something like that. Where I kind of rated Florida's top 10 players, because EA Sports announced that it's officially coming out this summer.
Cannot wait for that.
Yeah,
oh my
that's gonna be
God.
awesome.
top 10 Florida ratings, and Trey Wilson was number 1 right there, tied with Shamar James at a 92 overall. Just random. I mean, not random. I took different projections and stuff and used past ratings and things like that, Madden stats and everything, to kind of put those together. But it was definitely he was at the top, because I think he's very talented. But I'm going to stick with the wide receiver room. I think you could look at a guy like Andy Jean to potentially be a breakout player for Florida this season. He's going to get more reps with some of the pieces that they lost this offseason in that wide receiver room. And I think he could legitimately emerge as one of those outside receiver options going into this season. And then you'll see him progress as the year goes along into being more of a legitimate and kind of consistent threat from the outside for Florida.
Yeah, I like that pick in Andy Jean, a sophomore, very polished route runner out of Miami Northwestern. I was really excited about the pickup. I thought 247 was really underestimating this guy. I think they had him at like a 3-star, really low 4-star, but he was a really touted recruit that we got. So I'm really excited to see what he can do. I also think he put up some size the last couple of months, so I think that's going to be really big for him. And then kind of the same thing on defense, strengths, weaknesses, and then a breakout player if you have one.
Yeah, I would say that the strength is the linebacker room, and which is crazy because I think it's flipped so quickly from being one that was a bit of a concern last season, especially once Shamar went down against Georgia, into being now a strength with Shamar James, Grayson Howard, and then you also have the Miles Graham, Aaron Childs, and some other returning pieces that can serve as depth in that room. I do think you see Miles Graham play early. He got into the early enrolled, played in the spring. He'll be in that 2 deep. I also expect. I went to UA next future. The Under Armour All American game, and Aaron Childs walked in the building, and I was like, "That's an SEC linebacker." He looks ready to rock from day one, and I've said that since I saw him for the first time. He is every bit of what his measurables say. He is all of it. If the body composition part won't be a deterrent for him seeing the field early. It'll just be him getting up to speed in the defensive game plan, which he'll be learning that throughout the spring. They'll be communicating with him regularly, but I do think that you could see both of those freshman linebackers play, which means that Florida's linebacker group could be the strength of that defense heading into next season, with Shamar returning for his junior year and then having those young pieces around him. Weakness, I still think it's interior defensive line. I obviously know that they were able to come in and get Joey Slackman. They still have Cam Jackson, but there are some still question marks regarding their consistency. I know that they're disruptive. I saw it last season in flashes. If you saw that they were able to push downfield, they were able to kind of wreak some havoc in the backfield against ball carriers, in the rushing game. But then there were times where they were getting tired. The depth wasn't there. So you're starting to see this growth there from in sense of getting talent in, like Mekhi Barrow. Was a big addition for Florida in the middle, but it's still something that I don't necessarily think is ready to go this season. Even though they were able to get some of those more other guys into the fold there.
Yeah, I'd really agree with your take on the defense. I think the DB room, although it gets better, is never a certainty. I mean, we've seen the performance the last few years. It's nothing short of pretty embarrassing, honestly. But yeah, I think you can't speak enough about how much the linebacker room has improved. And, on the defensive line, I think that like you've said, we've shown flashes. It's just consistently getting to the quarterback and finishing and getting sacks. Sacks are such big, drive killers. And if we can't finish, on some of those pressures that we're getting, I think that's a big problem. And hopefully that changes this year. But yeah, I'm really excited. Honestly, like I was just talking to my buddy last night, actually. Like I think this is the first time where I can pretty confidently say that I don't see any major holes on the defense top to bottom. I think that in previous years, there was like, okay, this DB room is going to have a real tough time against so-and-so team, or like, our defensive line is just going to get destroyed by so-and-so's offensive line. But I really think this year, I think we're pretty deep at every position, more so than maybe the last even 5 or so years. So yeah. And then I guess real quick, what, breakout player is kind of on your radar for this upcoming year on the defense?
I think there are several, and I know I said interior defensive line is a weakness. I do think it can be supplemented by some of the talent that's on the outside. Obviously, losing your big piece in Princely Umamiellen's never ideal, but you have guys like Kelby Collins, you have Cameron James, you have a guy coming in who I think is a lot like Trayvon Walker in LJ McCray. So some pieces that can create pressure off the edge and also help in the run game, like those three. But I actually look to the secondary for a breakout player. I think Sharif Denson at that star spot could really emerge as someone that is going to have a major impact for Florida this season and be in a position to really assert himself as a starter for this season and moving forward in this Florida defense. I think he'll work in rotation there with DJ Douglas, transferred from Tulane. Those two will kind of command the star spot, and I think it's we'll see a jump forward in Florida's secondary because of the impact that Sharif and DJ have in that spot.
Yeah, It's really funny you say that because I was just talking to the same guy last night about the DB room, specifically Sharif Denson. I remember seeing an interview with him after he committed to Florida. After I think it was after one of his high school games, and he pretty much was saying how he would tell his head coach, put me on their best receiver, and I'll lock him down the rest of the game. And they showed some stats too, and literally like clamps on clamps against their top receiver,
Right.
like most Friday nights. So. I'm really excited. I think he's a dog. I think he has that Gator, mindset that hopefully will help to, bring us back to the good old days. But yeah, I'm excited about the defense for sure.
Yeah.
And then I
I
guess
actually
we're
have
going
an interesting
yeah.
story. So I went to school with Sharif's brother. I'm
Mhm.
from the same area as him, and grew up with them. We played football together, and Sharif was several years younger than him. And we were out like one time playing basketball up at just one of the regular like parks or whatever, and Sharif comes up there and bro was just getting after it, and I was like, this dude's kind of nice for being as young as he is, and it's just cool to see like how he's kind of grown into being someone that I now am projecting to be a breakout player for Florida. Just someone that I've kind of I saw him in middle school, I'm not gonna sit here and say like, oh, I expected him to be what he is now, but it's just cool to see that progression, and you definitely saw flashes of the athleticism that he brings, and it's been cool to follow his journey there since I went to school with Napier at Creekside High School growing up. So definitely interesting, small world for sure.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty crazy story. I mean, dang. If he was that athletic at middle school, we could just give you all the credit in the world and say this guy is scouting middle schoolers. But no, kind of
Hey
from
man, I'll
there.
take it. Hey, if you want to give me praise for that, I'll take it. I'm not gonna shy away from it. That's for sure.
For sure, for sure. We kind of wanted to transition to kind of the staff, the not the guys on the field, but the guys that have probably just as big of an impact on our season. So, what are some of the major additions or losses that we've kind of experienced? I know a lot of turnover on the defense. Kind of wanted you to touch on that a bit, and then just overall, from a much bigger picture lens, do you think that the staff is better or worse than the staff we had the 2023 season?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, if you're asking about like if there's a specific guy that I think is fantastic, I actually really like. I know it wasn't the splash hire that a lot of people were looking for, but I actually really liked the Gerald Chapman hire from Tulane. I think he is a very good coach. And I think that he's proven that he can have disrupted defensive lines. So while I do think that the position overall on the interior is a negative, I do think that or like a weakness, I should say, and it's weakness, but I do think that it will be improved from the product we saw last season simply because I think he's a really good coach. I think that he's able to get his guys to produce at a really high level, and even Carlos Dunlap said that he was a large portion of what made him as good as he was during his time in Cincy. So kind of helped him take that next step when he was with the Bengals. But outside of Chapman, I also really think that just getting Ron Roberts in the building, I'm interested to see how that dynamic works. But
Yeah.
in a vacuum, I think that a, I think it could be a healthy addition to this staff simply because of the history with, Austin Armstrong, who's still young in his profession. He's still learning how to kind of, produce as a defensive play caller, and just having someone to at least be another voice in the room that's he's willing to listen to, and he knows what he's talking about because that's the guy that he learned a lot from is beneficial overall. I think it's someone that can serve as a mentor, while also it's a mutually beneficial relationship because you have Austin Armstrong learning from him, but also Ron Roberts getting to continue to be involved in an SEC defense. And I think he's going to be a major part of the game plan. He's going to be a major part in adjustments on game days, which can only help Austin Armstrong and being able to kind of take this what we saw last season, which was lackluster, to put it lightly, and kind of improve significantly into, I'm not going to say that they're going to be a great defense, but at least improve to where every time they touch the field, you don't expect the opposing team to score. And I know that's not the nicest way to say it, but it's how it, like, that's just the way it's been for the past 3 years, really. 2021 under Grantham, 2022 under Patrick Toney, 2023 under Austin Armstrong. It's been every time the defense touches the field, there's a good chance this team's going to score. So you can't necessarily continue that. And I think getting Ron Roberts in the room is a major step in the right direction, at least schematically. It all depends on the play, but schematically, I think that can help a lot.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, Ron Roberts is a very experienced coach. He's going to come in as the co-defensive coordinator and kind of serve as a mentor, like Brandon said, to Austin Armstrong, our other co-defensive coordinator now, and the play caller on the defense. A lot of people on Twitter were saying, oh, it's crazy that Florida needs a mentor for their defensive coach, and that's not the type of program that should need that. But really, like, I don't know, if we put our pride to the side for a second, or our egos to the side, like, getting someone to help a defensive coordinator who has that experience that he may be lacking, like, in a vacuum, like you said, like, I am not opposed to that at all. I think whatever we can do to make that defense better outside of, PR and what it looks like perceptually from the outside, if we perform better on Saturdays, I think that it's a good move, right? And I also wanted to touch briefly on the addition of Will Harris. I think as a DB coach, it's a pretty solid hire to replace Corey Raymond. There are whispers that, Corey Raymond is a tiny bit washed, and, maybe we saw that a bit on the field last year. But I think that Will Harris, coming from the Los Angeles Chargers, I think he is not only recruited super well, but I think I'm really excited to see how well he's developed some of our younger guys, like you said. Excited to see where he puts Trequez Bridges from Oregon. And, obviously Jordan Castell balled out last year. I think he could be like a premier safety in the SEC next year. I'm really excited to see those guys. But overall, from kind of a much bigger picture lens, do you think the staff has improved or gotten worse since last year? I know we lost guys like Sean Spencer and, Corey Raymond, like I said, but, what do you think overall about the staff heading into 2024?
I think that there are positives and negatives both ways. I don't necessarily think it's improved nor worsened. I think it's kind of stayed. I think it's still similar, but I do think that they've addressed the areas that they've needed to well, if that makes sense. I think they've found some high upside pieces to kind of improve on the defensive line. But at the same time, I think there's just some trade-offs overall. So I don't necessarily have a great answer for that one, just because I do think it's still relatively similar. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing heading into next year.
Yeah, and then I know.
Sorry.
You got it, Sam.
Just a quick question before, whatever Michael was saying, we wrap up the staff. The strength and conditioning coach guy leaving kind of late in the coaching cycle to take pretty much, if I'm not wrong, a lateral move, if anything, a downgrade just based off the conference to go to Boston College. Is there any fault to go around in that happening at such a weird point in the cycle? Is that, an AD's fault? Is that just, him making a move to somewhere he's more comfortable? I know it kind of looked weird from the outside, but what's sort of the inside perception of that move?
I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing either. He has a long-term relationship with Boston College new coach Bill O'Brien.
Yeah.
They've been connected at the hip for a while now, and I think that just when he came calling, it was someone that was like, "All right, I'm willing to go do this because I know you." So I don't think it was anyone's fault, and it wasn't necessarily a move that was made because he didn't, necessarily like being at Florida or he was trying to get out or anything like that. I think it was just he was called by someone he kind of respects in the profession that he's worked with before, and he called him and said, "Hey, I have this opportunity to coach Boston College. I want to get them back to being one of the, or I want to get them up to being one of the top teams in the ACC. Can you come, lead my strength and conditioning staff?" And he's like, "Of course I can. You're my boy. We're going to go figure this thing out."
Yeah.
That's just kind of the dynamic of the profession. I think that happens in several areas. I mean, it's happened several times this offseason with all the coaching turnover throughout the year. So just having some of this back and forth is part of it. and it's something that Florida's dealt with fine. They actually just announced his replacement before we started here, and Tyler Miles, who's taken over. He was the guy that was serving as the interim when Fitzgerald left, and now he's going to be taking on the strength and conditioning program for Florida this offseason, which was actually requested by the players. So I do think that is a positive. So not necessarily saying it's a win for Florida, but I don't think it's a loss at this time overall. Just because I do still think that they're in a fine spot to move forward and be improved. Just in the strength and conditioning aspect from previous years.
Yeah, and it was kind of hard to see on social media, at least a lot of the players reacting to Fitzgerald leaving. They were pretty upset, but yeah, I mean, if they replaced him with the interim that they all wanted, I can't really complain because at the end of the day, they know what's best for their own bodies and their own growth and development physically. So yeah, and then I guess the last question about the staff was, I know there's a lot of talk about who's going to call the plays on offense next year. Are we hiring an OC? What is kind of your take on that? I personally don't think we're hiring another offensive coordinator, play caller. I think Napier's made it pretty clear in some of his pressers. But what is your take on that? And if you think we're not, do you think we should? And if so, who are some of the names that you would like to see? Willie Korn was one, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that they're gonna be hiring an offensive coordinator. If they would have, it already happened by now. Because now you're getting into the part of the year where, yes, they're just now getting started in their off-season regimen. They're kind of moving into the strength and conditioning aspect of things, but players have already started to learn the playbook. They've already started to learn the installation of everything, and so it's kind of difficult at this stage to have that turnover. So I don't necessarily see any area where Florida moves to bringing in an outside offensive coordinator or a new play caller. If they were to, I would expect it to be Russ Callaway being promoted and still commanding that tight end coach position as well as being the offensive coordinator. But at this time, I see Billy Napier continuing to call plays, continuing to be the quarterback's coach, and continuing to be the head coach. I think he's unloaded things off his plate elsewhere to kind of give him the ability to kind of have the trio of titles that he really wants to have. He wants to be involved in the offense in the way that he has been the past 2 seasons.
Yeah, so just a really brief follow up because I really want to know more about this myself personally as well. I think a lot of people when they talk about reducing stupid penalties like false starts on third and short, which nothing more upsetting than that. Seeing that consistently throughout the year, they attribute that a lot to Napier having a lot on his plate, and I guess beyond maybe hiring a guy like Ron Roberts that can help Armstrong out a bit more. What has he really done to kind of offload that? And are you okay with him calling the plays next year, or would you have preferred us making a hire or making a change in terms of who's calling the plays?
Yeah, I think the hire of Joe Houston, obviously he's an off-field assistant, but I do think that is a really important hire for this offseason just because you look at the success the New England Patriots have had both on special teams and just operationally throughout Bill Belichick's tenure and until this past season. It was fantastic. And just getting a guy that understands what it means to, or like the operation and how to go about things every single week and on game days, the way that he did this past season is a perfect match for Billy Napier. He's kind of put together a little situational football / special teams unit, I should say. There's a ton of different things that he has there. So just having that is specifically important for how this team moves forward and kind of reducing some of those self-inflicted wounds and kind of not getting behind the sticks or moving, from a 3rd and 2 to a 3rd and 7 or things like that. It's definitely kind of moving a step in the right direction on paper. It all depends on how it shakes out ultimately, but it definitely seems as if they're moving in the right direction there, or at least the thinking is to move in the right direction, which is what you want to see or what people wanted to see coming into this offseason, is just moves being made in the right areas. And then I don't necessarily think that because so you look at what Florida did offensively last season, and sure, there were times where it was a head scratcher. It was like, why is this play being called on this down? And I go back specifically to the Florida State game where Florida has momentum, they're up, and they try to run the double reverse pass back, whatever, and it gets blown up, and Florida kind of everything flips from right that point on. Momentum flipped. Florida State took over. Ultimately end up winning the game. It's easy to say in hindsight, oh wow, that's a terrible play call. But then you look at Florida's success over the, from probably about South Carolina and on, or you could probably even go back a game prior, but South Carolina and on, and you say, okay, they could score. That wasn't an issue. Florida was putting up points. They just weren't being able to match it defensively. So I don't necessarily think Billy Napier's play calling was one of the major issues, and I know that's not a consensus opinion of a lot of, fans of Florida, but I don't think that it was more his play calling specifically. I think it was him doing the play calling and being the quarterback's coach and being the head coach and being the situational football coach and being the special teams coach was the biggest issue. And so offloading some of the things that he did in previous years to kind of focus on those first three is something that I'm at least willing, I think Florida fans should at least be willing to see heading into this season before any real judgment is cast on. Now, if week 3 gets here and Florida's scoring 13 points per game, then that's, I was wrong, or that, there still needs changes to be made, whatever. But it's definitely something that I at least think it should be an open-minded approach to how he's handling some of the offseason and just structural changes within the program.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. I think that the offense was relatively efficient last season if you look at it compared to the rest of the country. And I think that, I guess the Florida fan base is pretty harsh, and rightly so. It's a really high standard here. But I think there's a lot of nitpicking on certain play calls. And yeah, I get tired of the screen passes on 3rd and long too. But like outside of some of that, and, let's just happen to say that double reverse pass worked. Like, would that have been, a major talking point on social media? No, right? Like that would have been a huge momentum, like advantage, even more so, and probably go on to win that game potentially. So I don't know. I'm personally okay with it. I think that you make a great point in saying that he's offloaded a lot, and I think that really does help. And a lot of fans will complain, oh, we run the ball way too much, but then they're also going to complain when he makes a risky play call like that. Like it's a lot of give and take that, I think that Napier can manage a lot better now that he has less on his plate. So, yeah.
Right.
As far as just the NIL goes, I mean, we can touch on it briefly. I don't want to take up too much of your time, of course, and I did want to touch on the schedule because I think it's one of the most intriguing things is dissecting such a gauntlet of a schedule when there's so much at stake for the program, specifically, Napier's future potentially and a future SEC outlook. But real quickly, as far as the NIL goes, is there anything you can tell me about how the program has sort of adjusted to the struggles that they've faced recently? I know there's a lot on the Twitter thread. I always see a lot about how fans are kind of mad that the school's asking them for money as their main way of fundraising. How is the program kind of handling these struggles that they're facing currently?
So that's a good question. I think before I get into that, I just want to say something real quick. NIL is so interesting. I kind of joined just this industry right when NIL was starting to be sprinkled in. And then they stopped the sprinkling in and they just said, all right, it's in, go take it, figure it out. And I feel like we're still in the figure it out phase of things now 3 years later, 2 years later, whatever. And it's just been so interesting to watch how some of these programs have learned how to handle it. Because obviously you have programs like Florida who's had their struggles. You have programs like Miami who started really hot and now they've kind of plateaued. You have programs like Ohio State who stunk and now they're one of the hottest NIL teams or NIL programs in the country. So it's just there's so much up and down with it all. And I think it's going to be a continual learning process until there are specific rules and procedures put in place to mitigate some of the struggles that are occurring within just this world of NIL, within the regulations of things and how it goes about. I think Florida's definitely taken a step in the right direction with moving on from the Gator Collective and kind of going into Florida Victorious and things like that. You started to see more adjustments to how things started early, where they didn't really know what they were doing because no one knew what they were doing. It just so happened that Florida was on arguably the worst end of the spectrum there. with the Jaden Rashada deal and everything like that. But I do think that they're still in the middle. I don't think they're the worst, but I also don't think they're the best. I think is still room to improve and to really truly compete in the NIL space. But it's kind of hard to exactly pinpoint or just be right like straight up about what's going on with NIL because it's so hard to understand exactly everything that it entails because without being in the room that with everything going on and kind of talking with the boosters and the Florida Victorious and the athletic director and things like that, it's hard to get a true understanding of what exactly that looks like. And I could sit here and talk to you all day about the overarching NIL atmosphere and things like that, but it's hard to really pinpoint exactly how Florida is dealing with things without seeing it play out. So Florida says they're on a good track, and then something else comes out, and it's like, well, this happened again, or whatever. It's definitely an interesting dynamic with how everything is working in this new world that college football is kind of evolving into.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because I think a lot of fans and a lot of really educated Gator football fans are saying it's the UAA and it's Scott Strickland, and I'm not even here to disagree. I think that there could be a lot of changes made for the better from both of those kind of entities and stakeholders, but I don't think that it's exaggerated of a problem as some people make it out to be. They're saying, "Oh, we have no money, we can't afford players." I mean, we just signed DJ Lagway and LJ McCray, and I don't have the numbers on what we're offering those guys, but I can make the basic assumption and guess that they were not cheap to kind of acquire. So it's not like we don't have any money. I think that we just don't have enough compared to the Georgias and Alabamas of the world that can just go out there and get whoever they want pretty much whenever they want. So I think that there's still a pretty big gap there. I think improvements are being made, and like you said, when things were first getting started, we really took the more cautious end of the spectrum, and I think that kind of hurt us a bit. I think the executives and powers that be at Florida, whether that be Scott Strickland or the UAA, really were not fully invested or didn't think that NIL was going to be a big deal. And I think that that kind of hesitation has really had some ripple effects that have still been hurting us today. But I don't know. I think there's a lot of potential for the future in terms of growth. I think Napier's spoken about that. We have a really good product to sell, but I think the best product to sell is performance in the field. So let's see how we do in the fall, and hopefully things get better in that space. But
I agree.
With that being said, we really wanted to kind of talk about almost most importantly, some of the bigger picture stuff about Florida and how they kind of fit into not only the SEC picture, but the national picture as well. So the first kind of question was, what is your general level of faith in Billy Napier as a head coach, and how many wins do you think he needs to keep his job next year? I know a lot of people are saying he's on the hot seat. Me personally, I think if he gets 6 wins, he's safe, makes a bowl game. I think that's enough, especially with this schedule. But it obviously depends how he looks in those 6 losses. Are we still competing in the third quarter with Georgia, or is it a boat race? Are we, finally beating Kentucky at home, or are we losing again? So it's a lot of questions. What's your kind of gauge on faith in him, and how many wins do you think he needs?
I think that he does there are things that he does really, really well. I think that there are that really, really well. I feel like I was a child saying Willy, but I think there are things that he does fantastically in terms of just building the program inside the building and how he kind of relates and gets players to play hard for him. I think that he has his guys bought in. I think everybody on the roster now is 100% bought in to what he's selling, and that can earn you a win or two every single year that you probably shouldn't get. And it's not necessarily saying that it's going to happen, but it always has the potential to do just that. When there are players that are willing to go out there and put themselves on the line to make sure that their coach gets to stay around another year if he's on the hot seat or whatever. It means something, and I think that he's kind of done that in a really big way since arriving to Florida. But the on-field product hasn't necessarily indicated that over the past few seasons. So I think there's a lot of question marks around Billy Napier, rightfully so. I can't sit here and say that I think he's the guy. I also can't sit here and say I think he's not the guy because of how everything's played out inside versus on-field product and things like that. So I do think that this year is a uber important season for him. Um, and I think that I agree with you, if they get to 6 wins and they're performing in games where they're playing, good football. They're not making those the mistakes that they've made over the past 2 seasons. They're not having the self inflicted wounds, and they're not getting blown out by teams that they shouldn't get blown out by. Then he will stick around for another season. I think that, and I've even heard that the 6 win mark is the benchmark for him. If he can get into a bowl game, potentially win 7, there's an opportunity to win 7 games going into next 2025. After 2024 going into 2025, he will be the Florida head coach, not beyond this season. And then it'll be a year by year basis, and they'll reevaluate each season. If not, then he would be gone, and it would be a new coach coming in to the fold there for Florida. So definitely an interesting schedule, definitely a difficult schedule, but something that if he can pull out 6, potentially even 7, would really set him in good grace with a lot of both the brass of Florida and some of the fan base. It would be definitely be on the right track for Billy Napier and him kind of turning this thing around, as it hasn't really looked pretty at times for him since arriving in December of 2021.
Yeah, and I think I also want to touch on it briefly. I think a lot of casual fans don't give Napier the credit. I think Napier joined Florida at a very, very unique time where, we still had Mullins guys who are obviously mostly now gone almost entirely. He joined at the height of the NIL X transfer portal saga. That's super hard to navigate, especially when you're brand new to a program. But also in reality, we have to give him some amount of credit because last year we were literally 2 plays away from being a 7-5 team. And would we be getting the same number of complaints from the fan base had we, made those 2 plays and in those games? Probably not, right? It's a lot of focus on the win-loss column. And I think that there's way too much focus on that. I don't think that is super indicative of progress or not progress for a team. And, people forget, you made the comparison to FSU and Mike Norvell earlier. Mike Norvell got fewer wins in his first 2 seasons at FSU compared to Florida. And sure, he had to deal with...
Okay, but not there was an increase in the wins in the 2 years. He went from 3 to 5. It's not like he started at 5 and then won 3 the next year. He went up 2. Billy Napier went back 1 in the second year with ugly losses like Arkansas in the mix.
Yeah, but I would take 10 wins over 8. I think that's I'm a math guy, so I
would take progress.
But we can't discredit him fully yet. And I think that a lot, like you said, Brandon, I think a lot of fans don't know what he's doing behind the scenes. Other coaches speak endlessly about his work ethic and how amazing that is. I truly believe that. Players are saying the same. He's done so much in the background to build up the structure and true culture of the Gators program that I don't think people recognize at all. He's really trying to do this from the ground up the right way, very structurally, and really build the foundation. And I think that, because he's done that, he's really set himself up well, especially when we talk about, how much experience he's given these freshmen that have come in that he's recruited. It's also a great pitch for incoming freshman recruits that they're going to get playtime immediately. But, in terms of, the schedule, I'm sure you've looked at it plenty of times. What is a realistic, floor and ceiling for this Gator team? I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
I've looked, you're right. I've looked at the schedule several times, and I genuinely have a hard time seeing them move past 7 to 8 wins. I think that's their ceiling this season, just because it's a gauntlet. And I think that 4-8 is, or really 3-9 could potentially even be the floor for this team. I think 5-7 and 6-6 is once again on the table, and kind of just remaining stagnant. And I agree with Sam. You saw what Florida State did, and yes, it wasn't the most beautiful product the first 2 seasons, but there were progress. There was a movement forward that we haven't seen under Billy Napier. And I said earlier about Florida State in terms of their returning production and how that can aid a team to turn things around, but it doesn't necessarily always mean that it's going to happen. And so with how this schedule shakes out, I think it's an uphill climb for this Florida team heading into this season to really show that progress that's needed before the year starts. And that's not necessarily, the answer I know a lot of people want to hear, but it's going to be a tough battle for the Gators throughout this 2024 schedule because I mean, Miami's coming into town. Cam Ward is one of the best quarterbacks in the country.
Yeah, he's really good. And that O-line is one of the best O-lines in the country as well.
Right. They are fantastic. And they have their holes there as well, but Cam Ward gives them a chance to compete this season with anyone in the ACC, I think. You look at Texas A&M, who is going through a bit of a rebuild, but they still have some talent. I mean, UCF's always going to be a battle just because it's UCF, Florida. UCF wants to still prove that they're on Florida's level, things like that. And the only thing I will say is they're lucky that a lot of these games are in Gainesville. I think that they have an opportunity because that's one thing that Billy Napier has done. They have shown up at home when they play at home. Florida's produced in the swamp when they're at full strength, obviously that final game against the season with Florida State, Max Brown was starting quarterback. There were several other circumstances that went into that one, but just having some of these games in Ben Hill Griffin Stadium has the potential for them to reach more of that ceiling level. But ultimately, I think 5-7, 6-6 is legitimately on the table once again for Florida heading into next season.
Yeah, and I try my best to. It's kind of a give and take because I really try to convince myself we're gonna have the
You've
potential
got
to
some
win.
bold takes on this channel as far as next year goes.
I legitimately think there is a path where we win 9 games next year. It's a very, very low chance of happening, but I see it happening. I think if we get off to a hot start and start 6-0, 7-0, I think all of those first 6 or 7 games are very winnable games. And we get to the second half of the season, sure, we'll drop a game to Georgia, at Texas, and Ole Miss with what they've added in the portal. But if those are our 3 losses, I think that there is an argument that we could potentially make a 12-team playoff if those are our 3 losses and those other 3 teams are playoff teams. Now that's a 0.001% chance of happening. But is it a chance? Sure. I think realistically, I'm kind of falling more with what you said, Brandon. I think realistically, a season where we win 7 or even 8 games this season is a great season for Napier. My official record prediction is probably right around 7-5. I think that it can get done. It's going to take a lot, but I think, like you said, we play very well at home. A lot of those big games that we need to build momentum for are at home. And yeah, I don't know. Did you want to look at some of those later games in the year? I think at Tennessee is definitely an interesting one. Yeah. And then we get Kentucky at home. What are your thoughts on some of those games after the Tennessee game? I know you talked about UCF a bit, but from that point forward, what do you see?
Tennessee is going to be tough because I think Nico.
I think he's the truth. That kid looks really good. I do too.
Well, so last year I came on I did a brief channel and then I was like, I'm taking up way too much of my time. I have no time to think. I gotta figure some things out here and get back to the thing that actually gets me paid. So I got back to simply writing, but I went on my channel and I said that I think that if Tennessee started Nico last year, they would have been better than they were with Joe Milton. I said I think Joe Milton's fine. He has a bazooka for an arm, but he's not accurate. And he's going to be someone that is middle of the pack and have them middle of the pack in the SEC. And that proved to be the case. I think Kentucky is they're Kentucky. They're going to be hard-nosed up front. They're going to be able to run the football well, and they're probably going to push Florida around up front. And that's the way. And
now with Vandegrift in the picture too, that's a 5-star recruit from 2 years ago who we just haven't seen a lot of, but he could, maybe he takes them to another level too.
Yeah, I will say I've talked to some people at Georgia. They are not high on Brock Vandegrift.
Yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of YouTube personalities say the same thing.
They don't. I'm interested to see how that plays out. I think he could be similar to Devin Leary, which means that Kentucky could be a 7-5, 8-4 team as well. But if he's anything better than that, then they could once again be in the picture to go 9-3, 10-2, and just really live up to the Mark Stoops mantra of being just on the cusp of being a great team, but just not being able to get over that hump. And then you go into those games against Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida State. I mean, if we're just keeping it a buck, I don't see That is a gauntlet, dude. That is just that entire November schedule it is going to be very tough to even pull out one win there. I think. I mean, we'll see what LSU brings to the table with Garrett Nussmeier being the quarterback there next season. But I mean, it's LSU, so they're going to have a ton of skill position players. They're going to be able to defend outside. I think better than they were last season. That's I think you see an improvement there defensively again. So again, that's another game where Florida's lucky that it's at home. It's just the youth of Florida, the previous production from past few seasons. It's just I find it hard to sit here and say that any of those games are for sure win. I find it hard to say that I would pick them to win any of those games at this point after that bye week on October 26th. So, not saying it's not going to happen, and it's I think it's way too. I haven't even seen what the spring looks like yet, so I think it's way too early to give any true prediction on what Florida looks like next season. So I'm kind of keeping my official score prediction in my back pocket for now, but. God, that is a tough schedule.
Yeah. And
oh yeah, you can go, Michael.
Yeah, on paper it looks very, very tough, and I won't lie. Georgia and then going to Texas, that is awful.
Just chalk those two up now. It's not happening.
I mean, I would say never, but
I'm pretty close to saying never.
It's pretty close to saying never.
I'm pretty close with the way those two teams look.
But if we're really talking about those last three games, I don't think you can count out the Gators in the swamp ever.
Right.
I think people forget I went to Death Valley last year, and this was at Death Valley. We're playing them tight for 3 quarters. We had the lead in the third quarter with Jaden Daniels nearly dropping 700 yards on us, and they couldn't stop us. We couldn't stop them. It was a shootout until the fourth quarter. I don't think that is a game.
A horrible LSU defense. That's the worst LSU defense we've seen in ages. They bring in players and new staff to kind of stop that. If that defense is any better, I think that game stays.
I mean, our defense was also pretty awful. Like, I know you've seen the plays of Jaden Daniels walking past us for 70 yards, but like, my goodness, I think that's a winnable game. I think I'm very high on Ole Miss this year. I think that they bring in a ton of transfer portal talent. Yam Banks on defense. Walter Nolan on the defensive line is crazy. And I think they're going to do really well. But again, that game is in the swamp, and we know Ole Miss is the type of team to drop some big-time games in the past. And I think that's a winnable game. And then I'm not going to get started on Florida State. We'll be here for hours. But
I think it's a winnable game. We have to see how both teams look by the end. It's going to be the closest I think it's been in the last 2 years, because when Jordan Travis, 2022, that game was pretty close.
Yeah, I think that game, at least as I see it now, is closer to a toss-up than any of the other games.
For now.
I think
easiest
to most difficult, I think it's Florida State, then LSU, then Ole Miss, and then you can take your pick with Georgia and Texas.
Right.
I think
my problem with the Ole Miss game, with the argument for the Ole Miss game, is the 3 games before that, you don't have a bye. Like, you don't get a break. So you're going, tough physical games against Georgia and Texas. We'll see what LSU has in store, but you're not getting that bye in between them. I think by then you're just worn down, coming off a couple straight losses, and that's still a team that's going to pound you. So I think that's where the struggle comes between arguing that as a winnable game.
Yeah, I mean, Ole Miss probably has some tough games right before that as well, but I agree. I think it's, and that could be a good thing that everyone stays hot, they stay warm those games, but more times than not, it's fatigue, and it's really hard. But yeah, I guess kind of to wrap things up, we just had a couple more quick.
Well, I did want to say something about the schedule before we warmed it up. In my opinion, and Brandon, I won't hold you too long, but I did want to get your opinion on it. When I look at the schedule, to me, the most important game, just the implications of everything, I think there's 2. But Miami as the first game of the year, I see as one of the most important games. If you want to go broader picture, I think in a while it's the most important game. Just when you look at the implications, because if you lose that, 6-6 becomes a reach now. Everything starts to spiral. You're going to win against Samford, but you're starting 0-1 in a stretch where you kind of go into it thinking you have to go, 6-0, 5-1 realistically. Now your first game of the year, Miami comes to your house, whatever ACC, SEC narrative you want to put in there too, and wins. I think that would have huge implications for the rest of the year and could cause a spiral. If they drop that game, the floor starts to look a little more realistic, in my opinion. And then another game, not as important, just in my opinion, I think it's important, is UCF at home. This is a totally revamped UCF in a new conference. They return a 1,000-yard receiver, return a 1,000-yard running back. I had a recruiting reporter come on here and talk for a little bit about some of the other additions that don't get as much light. Not to even mention KJ. I think if they lose that game, fans are just going to lose it on Billy Napier. Do you agree with any of that sentiment? Really, that's just how I've kind of looked at it personally.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that the first weekend of the season, Miami is a massive contest for Florida. I think that could completely dictate how the season goes overall. And it also kind of sets the tone for the question marks that going into the season. Can Florida take care of the self-inflicted wounds? Are they going to have the false starts, the issues lining up and operationally that we've seen from them in so long? Because Miami, they're a team that can elicit that from you. This isn't a cupcake start. This is all right. You're jumping into the fire. It's a serious way to start the season. So that Miami game is crucial. And I think I just find it not necessarily funny because I agree with you, but you said that of course they're going to beat Samford. I do think it's funny that they put up 52 points on Florida in the Swamp a few years ago, just like overall, because it was like, well, are they? But I agree that they will beat them. It's just that was the first thing I thought of when you said
Yeah.
it.
Me
So
too.
you got Miami. And then UCF, I agree. It's really those in-state battles.
I feel like
think that
UCF
has
is
a
just
lot.
one of those games where they get caught sleeping on them a little bit and
Right.
almost helmet
Right.
scouting in a sense, where you just
Yeah.
look at the helmet, you associate them as still a group of 5 team in your head, and they come in and with all this talent that you didn't know about and kind of put a number on you, really.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see how Florida performs off the bye weeks this season. They get
Yeah.
2, and in the past it hasn't necessarily been the prettiest when they've had byes, just because I feel like Florida has been fine when they get in a rhythm and they're good at home. So you have optimism that they can beat Miami, that they can beat UCF, but it's just to see them kind of jump into the fire, even though they'll have 4 games under the belt by the time they're playing UCF, having that week off. How do they respond to not having a game the previous week and going through the regular game day procedures week in and week out? Having that week to kind of recuperate is usually good, but it hasn't necessarily been the case in the past few years. Obviously going into Georgia isn't always the best sample size or the best example, because there's you can get off a hot game where you win and get blown out by Georgia, so it doesn't really matter too much there. But yeah, I think Miami and UCF are 2 really big ones. I also am looking at that Tennessee game in Neyland just
Yeah.
because it's going to be a difficult one, but I feel like that you got to win a few on the road. That's one of the ones that you're probably going to have to pull out, because once you get past that October 26th bye, like I said, I just have a hard time seeing any for sure wins right now. I don't want to necessarily chalk them up as losses, but uphill battle. You're climbing a mountain to win any of those 5 games in November.
Yeah, and I looking at the schedule again, like it is so tough. I mean, even talk about going to Mississippi State, like that is never a game that's going to be easy.
Yeah, but that roster just feels really depleted overall.
Yeah,
It's
I
a
know.
winnable game. It's got to be one of those winnable
Definitely winnable. But when you say it like that, oh, it's a winnable game. Like
Yeah.
sure, all these first few games are winnable, but it's going to be a battle, And
Yeah.
thankfully, I really want to get to go to Tennessee and Texas next year. I think those are the 2 biggest on my kind of wish list. But when you talk about the implications of the Miami game, I was just talking about it with my buddy again last night. It is huge, man. I mean, I know one of my best friends, Rohan, who will be my roommate next year. Shout out Rohan. He's bringing his older brother and 10 of his brother's friends that'll be sleeping on our floor for that Miami game. One of my other friends is bringing like 7 of her family members that are all Miami fans, and it's just going to be a huge, huge game. We haven't played Miami.
I wish I could go to that one, but I plan on being at the UCF one.
Yeah, I think that game is going to be the dictator of how I see the rest of the season, at least. If we win
Miami
that game, handedly, Miami, the Miami game. If we lose that game, I will officially be depressed. So, yeah, I think that, I don't know. I can't wait for that game to come around. And also what's really nice is Gator fans and UF students especially don't have to wait very long. It's a week 0 game. we're up here for one Saturday, and we got 1 week till kickoff. So the whole country will be watching, and if we lose that game, I cannot even imagine what things will be said online about us. And
You'll hear a lot from me, that's for sure.
well, yeah, we'll see if I don't have you blocked by then, Sam. But yeah,
Well, Ryan will be with you in person, I think. So.
Oh, dude, that's gonna be even worse. He's a Miami fan. You're the
Yeah.
FSU fan. I can deal with you, but
We're pretty diverse here.
Yeah, Brandon, if you had just a couple more minutes, I don't want to. I know it's been a kind of long pod. If you have to go, it's all good. But we did have two very brief questions on some like broader non-Gator football talk. If you'd be down to answer those as well.
Yeah, that's cool.
All right, cool. Yeah. So, we talked about NIL, and, obviously the portal has become a really big, factor in a team's success. We saw FSU last year really revamp their squad through the portal. I think it's safe to say that the combination of the two in terms of both NIL and the portal has really made it almost like college football free agency. And I think that's pretty problematic for a lot of teams. I think that it's not necessarily a fair playing field. What do you think are some of the fixes that can be made? I know there's talks about the NCAA disseminating and having, the SEC and Big Ten kind of take over. What are your thoughts on, some of the changes that can be made to kind of regulate this in a healthy and sustainable way?
I mean, ultimately, I think that if it keeps going in this direction, you're going to see college teams hire general managers, and you're just going to have every team having a GM, and you're going to try to set up contracts on a yearly basis. Like, you're going to try to set up like full-on NFL contracts for college students. And the only way that they're able to leave is if they go to the NFL, and they're going to have different stipulations involved, because I think a lot of I understand the talk of free agency, but it's worse than free agency, because a kid can be here for 1 year and dip. He has no obligation to stay there. At least in free agency, you sign a 3-year contract and you're locked into that for as long as you're with them. And then if you and they can pick up an option on you for a 4th year, or you can pick up an option for a 4th year, just depending on how things work out there. So it is a mess, and just the entire landscape of college football is crazy in the way that it's changing. I do think that there is a lot of good that comes from it, but like you said, there is a lot of bad that comes as well, just because of everything that it entails. The constant merry-go-round that we're doing with talent, and every year you look at a roster and you're like, oh wow, these names are familiar, but these teams are not. The sticker on the side of their helmet is different this year. So it's definitely interesting to see how everything goes, but I think general managers is definitely going to be the first step in the right direction for a lot of these college programs, and that's to say that the NCAA doesn't implement any type of regulations for what NIL looks like, and I think that if they do, they're already behind the 8 ball, so it won't necessarily mean anything to really fix. I don't want to say fix, because they're not fixing it, they're just trying to mitigate some of the issues, but I think they had plenty of years, plenty of time to figure out what this world would look like, but they kept pushing it down and saying, nah, this isn't going to happen. This isn't going to happen. Nah, we're never going to get there. Oh, nah, players will never get paid. And then it came and they're like, well, I mean, what are we supposed to do? We haven't had any time to plan for it. It's like, okay, well, it's because you've ignored the looming issue for the past 25 years, and now you're trying to jump into the game way too late. So it's a weird dynamic in college football right now, or college sports in general, for that matter.
Yeah. Because I think people forget, and even I forget, when people talk NIL, it's for the entire athletic program. It's not just football.
Yeah, that was a huge. It's a huge point that flies under the radar. It's when I spoke to the UCF person, he said, like, he harped on that point, that the struggles that some schools are facing is that although they might get a good amount of NIL money total, but it has to be spread out across numerous sports programs, and when one school is becoming good at one sport, it's hurting another because they're directing more resources. If you want to take a look at schools, the big schools like Ohio State, right? Haven't heard about their basketball team in ages. They're directing all their money towards football recruiting, so it just happens.
I actually did hear about Ohio State the other day. They had a huge win against Purdue, but
how's their record looking overall? Even FGCU over here gets ranked wins, so it just hurts. It's a point that flies under the radar. There's so many sports programs at a school that need attention NIL wise.
Yes, and I mean that's the big, I guess, gripe with Strickland is we have a great athletic department overall, one of the best in the country overall. Our gymnastics team is great. Baseball is obviously great. Besides the loss we
Besides
had
this
in
weekend.
our opener, and then the basketball team is making strides right now too. I could talk about that for a while as well, but when it really comes down to it, football is the heart and soul of the athletic program or athletic department, and I really want to see that improve. I think a lot more resources need to be poured in there. But yeah, the very last question we had for you, Brandon, was it's a new year this year where we're going to see 12 teams make the playoff. Me personally, I'm not a huge fan of
I
the
love it.
expansion. I'm not a huge fan of the expansion to that degree. I think
Mm-hmm.
that maybe 6 or 8 would have been a better number to start
Probably
with, and
8.
if we I think that would have been better to start with, and then maybe if we saw that need in the future, we could have jumped to 12. But kind of, what are your thoughts on the 12-team playoff? I think it has a lot of pretty bad implications for bowl season, and the I guess importance that bowl games have. I mean, we already know that they're not super important now. So, yeah, what's your
Right.
take on that?
Bowl games in general have not meant anything since the original college football playoff came out, so I don't think expanding it is really going to mean much. Instead of 2 or 3 overall bowl games mattering, where it's the two college football playoff games and the
Mm-hmm.
national championship, now you get even more. So I do think that it means that there are more that are going to matter. Obviously, you'll get the ones of the mid teams that are playing against each other that won't matter, but that's already the kind of the case for just anything overall. I actually really like the 12-team playoff. I'm interested. I'm actually really excited to see how the playoff games on campus kind of
Yes, that is one of
is.
the
Like,
best
I think
parts
that's
by
going to be
far.
awesome.
It's
I
gonna be
think
so
you're going to
cool.
get to see a lot of really cool environments of the higher seeded teams, and kind of having those home games in the playoffs, because like that means so much, because you're trying to move on, you're trying to get into that next round,
I mean,
and you have
you could say
obviously.
like
What were you saying?
biggest home game ever, right? Like
Right,
if you have a
right.
national championship, that's not at
Well,
home,
I
right?
don't know if the national champion. How many of the games are played at home now? Is it only the
It
first
would be
round, or is it
it would
all the
be the
way?
first rounds. Yeah,
Okay,
it'd
yeah,
be the
that
first
makes sense.
rounds.
But
Yeah,
still, like, if there's ever a home game in the swamp that we play in the playoff, like,
right,
I cannot think of a bigger, higher stakes game that's ever
No,
been played in the swamp, right? Like,
right,
right.
agreed.
it's going to be crazy.
Right. Can I like just because and this is a feasible possibility. Obviously, they haven't been able to win big games lately, but can you imagine a whiteout at Penn State for
Yeah,
a playoff
that
game?
would be quite the game.
Oh my
Electric,
goodness,
right? Like imagine a whiteout against like a Alabama. Let's say Alabama kind of has a little bit of a dip, but they're still in it, and
crazy.
then they go to Death or Happy Valley to take on. That would be just like there's so many great possibilities that can happen with it, and I'm
Even
just
even
excited to see
group of 5
what
team
those
is
look
going to
like.
get a home game this year in a
Right,
playoff. I think that
right,
could be huge. That could totally tilt the scales
yeah,
a little more in their favor. If a Tulane
yeah,
or a Boise
right. The
State, a
Tulane.
historic
That's what I
yeah,
was gonna
exactly,
say.
historic group of 5 programs like Tulane and Boise State.
Right.
I love the auto bid for the group of 5 thing, and I love the auto bid for conference champion because we obviously just kind of went through a little tough stretches last year as far as that goes. So no more of that. But I love both of those, and I'm excited. Michael hated the group of 5 thing coming in. I'm glad that we get to at least give him a chance for going undefeated,
Right.
winning your conference.
I just,
Yeah.
I think that it's kind of just redundant. Like, I think that if they go undefeated and they play well enough, they should deserve the spot anyway. I think giving them an auto bid,
They
like,
don't get
I
it
think
because
they're,
we'll hear the strength of schedule argument. We'll hear all that nonsense.
yeah, but
Right.
like, there's 12 spots for a reason. You can't just leave out a 12. I don't think it would happen
Oh,
where if a group of 5 goes undefeated, they get left out of a
you
12
can't leave
team
out an
playoff.
undefeated team, you say?
No, there's a difference though. The ACC is arguably worse than the group of 5.
Okay.
Um, however, no, I don't know. I think that it should be. I think it definitely should be. I don't know, earned, but I don't have major problems with it.
Yeah.
It'd be fun to see a group of 5 get destroyed every year in the playoffs.
Maybe they pull off an upset against a Penn State who can't win big games.
Yeah, potentially. But yeah, with that being said, Brandon, we really appreciate it. I think that's all we
Yeah,
really
thank
have
you
for
so
you,
much.
unless you had
Absolutely,
anything.
yeah.
I know you've been here a while, but yeah, feel free to plug your socials and all that.
We'll plug them in the
Yeah.
description too.
Awesome. Yeah, go follow me on Twitter at it's B Carroll, 2 R's and 2 L's in Carroll. And then also allgators.com for any football, basketball, recruiting, occasionally baseball, as we're getting into that, news, analysis, etc. Of your needs. We got you over there at AllGators. So I really appreciate y'all for having me on. It was a good time.
Oh,
Of
for
course.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll be sharing, the YouTube links and everything on, Twitter and TikTok and whatnot. But yeah, if y'all could just hit that like button, share, subscribe,
Subscribe and
like
tell us
always,
what you
that'd
want
be
to see
great.
more of in the comments.
Yeah. Yeah. Let us know in the comments. But yeah, with that being said, thanks again, Brandon. It's been great. And yeah, we'll talk again as the season gets closer, hopefully.
All right.
Absolutely.